Cops of Reddit, what simple noise complaint call blew way out of proportion? First off, this is why we wolfpack every call even though our supervisors don't want us wasting time responding to seemingly simple noise complaints and 911 hang-ups. We had a noise complaint coming from a small community saying there was a party out in one of the arroyos down this long private drive. Like 3 or 4 calls saying there was a huge bonfire and music. 3 of us are on shift and start cruising out there. It's like 10 miles away, so we're driving fast but not running code. About 4 miles out we hear the ambulance get dispatched for a shots fired call in the same area and they are told to stage for law enforcement. We always get the med calls a few minutes after central so we keep cruising. The call from our dispatch catches up a couple minutes later telling us to expedite as the shots are coming from the same area we're headed to. We run code, get there, and see about 15 cars coming down the private drive. People start jumping out of passengers' seats and back seats and running into the night. We squeeze by the line of cars. We pull up to the bonfire and get down with our rifles. One guy is laying on the ground shot. His girl is screaming and laying over him. There's still about 15 more abandoned cars and people are running everywhere. The guy ended up getting shot above his right nipple with a 9mm. He survived but wouldn't tell us who shot him. He and his girl both stated they didn't know anyone at the party even though it was 4 miles off the main road. I'll throw in my story here. Why not? Worked in Harlem 8 years. Have since moved over to Jamaica, Queens. But I was driving my SGT that night and we were at the corner of 145 and 8th Ave. There's a Popeyes in that corner but above it is 5 stories of apartments. We're stopped at the light heading westbound and all of a sudden we start hearing a loud screaming coming from one of the windows above Popeyes. It was the summer and our windows were open so my sergeant looks up and says, "Holy it," so I immediately lean down and look out the windshield and see a white lady in her 40s hanging out the window screaming at the top of her lungs. She's covered in blood, her hair is a mess and she's screaming for help. I quickly pull the car over and ask for an additional while we go up the stairs to the apartment. When we exit out of the stairwell there's smeared blood all over the walls leading into the apartment, which has its door cracked open. We head in slowly, guns drawn, and we see a man step out from the bathroom who doesn't have a single scratch on him. We scream at him to get on the ground and quickly cuff him up while the screaming continues in the back room. As we get him up off the floor our additional shows up and we quickly pass him off to them and head to the back of the apartment, guns still drawn towards the screams. As we round the corner into the living room we see a woman in a torn undershirt covered in blood and scratches and she has a cat on her back and she's whipping her body around trying to get it off her. She slams herself into the wall and the cat finally lets go and falls to the ground. It looks at us and heads back towards the lady when all of a sudden she kicks it like a football. And I mean like Sebastian ducking Janikowski type kick. And it flies through the air and almost hit the ceiling as it bounced off the wall and scurried behind couch. I asked her what is going on and if her boyfriend did this to her and she screams at us, "No, this ducking cat is trying to kill me." Needless to say, we quickly get the guy out of cuffs and have to call Isu to come catch this psychotic cat. That's one that will stay with me till retirement. Not a cop but I've called one and that did not end the way I expected. So my first apartment after college was in a high rise and had really thick walls. I blasted my TV and Xbox and couldn't ever hear them in the hallway and I never heard a single thing that any of my neighbors ever did. One night I started hearing some loud thumps coming from the apartment above me. A few months ago part of my apartment had flooded because of a torn water line going into the washing machine above me that happened during a domestic disturbance where the guy wound up leaving in handcuffs. Knowing that there was this history in that apartment I called the cops in case it was a repeat occurrence. I can't stress enough how thick those walls floors were. I had never heard anything through them. So the cops get there and stop by to talk with me first. I gave them the rundown of what had happened in the past and they could easily hear the loud thumps and crashes so they headed on up to check it out. But 90 seconds later they are back at my door, both trying to keep from laughing. "You absolutely did the right thing to call us but don't worry. It was just a couple of huge fat guys playing Wii Sports. Have a nice weekend." Got a call for a noise complaint at a frequent flyer's house so we cruised out figuring the guy was drunk and we'd pick him up on a parole violation. We got to his house and he had literally blown off half of his garage and half of his arm trying to make dabs. Turns out the guy thought he just had to burn a bunch of weed and it would melt down into oil, so he gathered up a dozen propane tanks and somehow managed to turn his garage into a bomb. The best part was he swore up and down, while he's screaming in pain, that we only came out to steal his it. Not a cop, but when I was a senior in high school, we had a party at this dude's duplex. Yeah, it was classy. None of us were 21, but we were all drunk. Someone called the cops about the noise and traffic on the street. Cop shows up. It's cool. Just told us to take it inside. One of the girls asked the cop to check on the tenant next door because they heard the lady arguing with some guy. About the time, the guy staggers out of the duplex with a big ass knife sticking out of his chest and the lady behind him with another big ass knife in her hand. The cop draws on the lady and tells her to put the knife down, which he did, right between dude's shoulder blades. As drunk as I was, I thought I was seeing things, but nope, it happened. Not a cop, but was at a party that my friend had that the cops were called. The guy who owned the house was blacked out, and one of those guys who likes to show off by being badass. Well, cop comes. Super nice guy, joking around with us, asking us to just have fun at a reasonable noise level. Owner of the house says, "Duck the police. I'll handle this myself." Turns the music as loud as it can be and sparks a joint. Cop still being in the garage. Cop told all of us that didn't live there, all being respectful to him, to just get home safe. Next day, owner of the house is calling everyone. They're asking why he has over $1,000 worth of fines pinned to his refrigerator. Not a police officer but a former dispatcher. We got a call one night of loud music. Normally officers don't go on these types of calls, especially on a busy weekend night, but this caller called a crap ton of times and was a pain, and the beat officer was bored, so he went to the apartment complex. He disregarded his backup and responded alone. About 5-10 minutes later he called for a backup, so I started one. Nothing unusual. I figured it was just a big party or something and he needed assistance breaking it up. About 30-45 minutes later he called for a supervisor. This was very unusual as supervisors never respond on noise complaints, and they hadn't arrested anyone or given any indications that they'd had to fight anyone or anything else where a supervisor would respond. Turns out that there was a 13-14 years old girl who was there alone because her parents were away for the weekend. She had been chatting with a 30-something guy from a town 2-3 hours away. Since her parents were gone, he came down to keep her company. When the cop got there he discovered that she was there with him and saw used condoms all over the place apparently. Guy went to jail. Girl went to the children's home. Not a police officer, but I used to have a mentally unstable neighbor. One night she was screaming at our house from her balcony about the noise we were making and how she had called the cops. We didn't have the TV or stereo on. I was alone mashing potatoes in a stainless steel pot, and the clink 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 of the metal masher on the pot somehow carried across the yard and aggravated her so much she needed to call the police. The police show up, knock and ask about the noise complaint. I explained that I was mashing potatoes and demonstrate the noise. They told me that they regularly respond to noise complaints from her, and only 2 days before she had complained because her back neighbor was hammering in a picture hook at 2 in the afternoon. They tell me to just ignore her and bid me farewell. Super late to this, so I'll make it short. Ex-cop, NSW Australia, got sent to a street out the back of our sleepy little town. Sonian was using a chainsaw at 2 AM. Not unusual because the properties are really big, but this was being done next to another house, in a garage. Turned out to be a lady chasing her husband around the room trying to jab him in the D with the chainsaw. Okay, I'm also not a cop, and my story happened when I was maybe 5-6 years old, so details are hazy for me. This would have been in the 90s in Grand Rapids, Michigan. In case anyone might recognize the story. One night a guy comes to our door and starts banging on it unrelentingly. My dad sees this big, shirtless guy who looks like he's running for his life. My dad, being another big shirtless guy, decides to have me and my siblings go to our rooms, and he lets him in. As he was soaking wet and it was cold out, he sat on the couch, and I remember my dad wrapping him in a blanket, and all he could say, over and over, was "Thank you, thank you, I saw toys in your yard and I knew you would help me. My dad assumes the guy is delirious, possibly drunk, and calls the cops when he starts to really freak out. He didn't want the neighbors calling because they assumed a fight was happening in our home. We had an old, super nosy neighbor who loved making noise complaints against my dad. Next thing my sister and I know, we're looking out our bedroom window at a veritable sea of squad cars all the way down the street. Turns out the guy was running for his life, and the guy he was running from had already killed a friend of his and had the body in the trunk of his car. Edit. Finally found an article on it. This was definitely it. And another. Here's a good one. House party. All in our mid-20s. Drunk friend. We'll call her Louise. Is shmammered. So drunk that she is taking a hammer to some of the hand-me-down furniture in the house. Owner doesn't care. He thinks it's hilarious. Louise is screaming and loudness makes its way outside. She's screaming, "I am Spartacus. I will kill you all." I mean really screaming, "I will kill you all" a lot. It's like 10 p on a Friday in FL. Quiet neighborhood. She and her BF leave. Not even 5 minutes later 60 PD cruisers and about a dozen cops come rolling in. Apparently they were there on a potential homicide investigation as they got a call about a woman screaming bloody murder and it sounded like someone may be getting killed. Owner is detained. Agrees to let the cops do a walkthrough of the house to make sure there's no blood corpses of concern. Only drunk college-age bags. Cops walked through, thanked us, asked us to keep the volume reasonable, and left. When I was a volunteer cop, I'm a regular now. A few years back I was just about to leave to go home. Around 3 AM. Call comes in for my buddy, we're single crewed as standard, about some old man locked out of his house. I offer to come with to help just in case and put my kit back on. Q when we get there it's not an old man. It's a middle-aged man who's quite built and drunk. He kicks off with my mate who pepper sprays him, which I watched majestically bounce off his cheek and hit me straight in my eye. I turn back, in pain and half blind, to see him punch my mate in the face. I dive across and pick him up and get him against the wall. His Staffordshire Bull Terrier then proceeds to rip my right leg to shreds, so I'm then trying to fight both of them. Managed to get the dog away and we cuff him, shouting for assistance, which lead to all of my shift turning up. Guy had the audacity to fight it in court. 2. Edit. Not a noise complaint but whatevs. Edit 2. No, I did not in fact cuff the doggy. I cuffed the bad man. I am a cop. Verified over on Protect and Serve. We once got a noise complaint about loud noise from the upstairs apartment. It was about 3 AM and caller told dispatch it sounded like the upstairs neighbor was moving furniture and dropping stuff. Fair enough. 3 AM is no time to be moving furniture and disturbing neighbors. I get there, get a hallway where the apartment is and immediately hear arguing and screaming. Call for another unit. Proceed down the hallway and find the apartment door almost completely shattered in the frame. I yell, "Police, coming in," and go inside, since this seems like someone is in danger. Sure enough, I get in there. Girl's face is completely beaten in. The apartment is in complete disarray. Woman said she fell and that is why her face was injured. Says they just moved in, which explains the mess. Says her husband is out of town on business. He had actually gone out the fire escape when I yelled out police. We took her statement and still wound up charging the guy with domestic violence. Case got dismissed when the wife came to court and continued her "I fell down in the floor, punched me in the face 30 times" story. For a more light-hearted story, we kept getting fireworks complaints from this one lady on 4th of July, so we finally went over and talked to her. She made some good points about fireworks are illegal, and they are shooting them off over her house. We tried making the point it's the 4th of July, if we responded to every fireworks complaint we couldn't respond to anything else but would go talk to the neighbors. Went over and said, "Hey, look, just be a good neighbor. Cut it out. I don't want to write fireworks tickets, but if this continues to be a problem we will." Left feeling like we were all on the same page. As I was walking back to my squad car when the idiots come running around the other side of their house and start firing Roman candles at me. Others decided to set some other fireworks off underneath my squad car. That is one way to go from getting a verbal warning to multiple felonies, which wound up not even getting indicted because the prosecutor didn't think it was that big of a deal, and they were just having fun on the 4th of July, and we couldn't go out and enforce every fireworks complaint on the 4th of July, and I'm still pissed about it. Mine's a little different, blown out of proportion. 4 of us were sitting around a wooden table playing quarters at around 8 PM on a Friday. The sliding door opened because it was nice out. Cops knock on the door due to noise complaint. Apparently our low conversation and the sound of quarters hitting the table irritated the neighbors while they sat on their deck, 0.200-ish feet away. I got dispatched to loud music one night at an apartment complex. I arrived and could clearly hear Snoop Dogg being played while I was standing in the parking lot. I banged on the door for well over a minute to no avail. I opened the door to find 2 stoners higher than Jesus Christ on a motorbike. Guy was laying on the couch while his friend was laying on the floor. I see clear as day a pound of weed on the floor next to the guy. He was hugging it like Tom Hanks hugged Wilson. He looks up at me with a look of pure disgust and says, "No, don't take the kush. Alright pal." Not a cop, but we had a noisy neighbor who lived right across the hall from us. They would always be banging around and yelling at 2 AM. One night the cops came and kicked the door in. Through the peephole I saw them tackle the guy and haul him off in handcuffs while his girlfriend screamed. Turns out she was harboring a known fugitive. I'm not a cop, but I called them one time to complain about crazy loud noises coming from the apartment beneath us when I just wanted to sleep. Turned out they had a small weed farm in that house. We lived above it for at least a year. Then the cops kept me awake the whole night cleaning out that apartment, so I still didn't sleep. Could possibly qualify as a tifu, but it was over 20 years ago. I responded to a loud noise party complaint that turned out to be a group of drunk adult women skinny dipping in a backyard pool. The FU part was telling dispatch to give me the call if the complainants called back. The dispatcher, a woman, found out what it was about and turned me into the commander. No disciplinary action, but she stayed pissed for a while. Not a cop, but every time my parents had non-white friends over for a get-together, the neighbors would call the cops for a noise complaint. They always arrived to a respectable noise level and wished them a good night. Stupid neighbors. Not a cop, but one night in college I was sitting on my apt balcony studying and the old lady next door is yelling and screaming at me to turn the noise down. I didn't do anything cause I'm just studying. No music, no laptop, just my books and notes. She called the cops. He talks to me. I give my statement about how she harasses anyone and everyone who is walking past her yard, whispering or just sitting outside. Police goes to get her statement and she slapped him across the face. I didn't hear the conversation, but she did get arrested. So a simple noise complaint turned into the lady being arrested for assault. I'm not a police officer, but recently in Niagara Falls, NY, we have been having some extremely strong windstorms. For those who have never been there, it's a pretty open space surrounded by the city. Well, during the last windstorm, residents of the city called police because the wind was too loud for them to sleep. So I worked security for my apartment complex. There were 3 of us that did this. Mostly this consisted of ticketing cars that were parked in resident parking and having them towed if necessary. There were 3 of us there that did this. All police officers. I had just arrived at the complex when one of the other officers called asking for help. They had received a complaint from a resident complaining of noise. The offending apartment was known to be a problem for noise complaints. Because of past dealings, we called for on-duty officers to respond. So we make contact with the apartment and they open the door. It was an apartment full of tap-out wearing MMA wannabe Air Force airmen who were drunk and watching some fights on pay-per-view. We say there have been complaints of noise. It went south from there. I don't recall what was said, but I do recall a fist come flying out of the apartment and striking one of the cops. Then people poured from apartment and the fight was on. OC was deployed. Someone tried to grab a cop's gun. It wasn't pretty at all. A whole lot went wrong on both sides. When it was all said and done, several airmen were in jail and eventually convicted of felony charges. An emergency eviction was granted, kicking them out in 3 days. And finally I was told all Air Force personnel involved were kicked out. Some with dishonorable discharge, Not sure on that though. All because they didn't want to shut the duck up on a weeknight. Obligatory not a cop etc etc. I used to live in the student area of a town city called Leeds. I say student. It was mainly a mix of students. One second generation Pakistani Bangladeshi immigrants and a much smaller group of hippish locals. So a pretty high level of noise was tolerated in the local area anyway. A common thing, especially while the universities are in session, was house parties. Now, when I say houses, most of these were old terraced houses, many of which had basements. So the standard was to have a sound system hired for the basement, occasionally a smaller one or a band in the living room. It was a fairly regular thing for the police to come along and say, hey, keep the noise down or we have to break up the party, possibly with drug dogs. But one night, this went wrong. The police turned up in their car. Both male and female officer went into the house, down to the basement, leaving the car unlocked. Of course, some smartass threw the contents of a wheelie bin into the back seat, and someone else even figured out how to detach and steal the lights. Of course, when the officers came out to find what had happened, all hell broke loose. Pretty much every officer in the city was called to the location. Riot police and students were in the streets causing carnage. None of the police really had a plan for what to do in this situation. There are still some videos kicking around the internet, although they were taken at night on camera phones a decade ago. 1, 2, 3. Story from my dad's cop days. He and his partner respond to a call for a noise complaint and possible DV. It was at an apartment complex with a fenced-in courtyard. When they arrive, the husband is in the courtyard with a handgun popping off shots into the air. My dad calls in his sergeant. When he gets there, he tells my dad to walk around the complex to the other fenced-in side. As my dad starts to head that way, his sergeant pulls a shotgun out of his cruiser. So my dad is finally in position. He is looking through the fence and hears his sergeant telling the guy to put the gun down. Dad looked away for a second and the guy must have pointed the gun at them because all he heard was the shotgun go off, and he looked back through the fence. The guy had his left hand up in the air and his right was just dangling by a piece of muscle. Dad's sergeant blew the guy's arm off. Now fast forward 15 plus years, dad is taking me shopping for football cleats. Hey son, see that guy over there? The guy with one arm? Yay. That's the guy my sergeant shot. He was buying soccer cleats for his little boy. Not a cop, but my daddy's. He got called to a noise complaint, and when he and his partner arrived, it's a bachelor party in full swing. They tell the guys about the complaint and ask them to turn it down. Guys say something along the lines of, "Duck you." So now they say, "We're not asking," and the groom responds by throwing a punch. They grab him and make to handcuff him. When the entire bachelor party empties out of the house, my dad and his partner call for backup, and the scene devolves into an all-out brawl. Probably 10-15 cops and even more drunken partygoers. At some point, my dad's got a guy on the ground, and he's putting handcuffs on him, when a big guy comes up behind him and grabs my dad by the throat. He pulls him up in a headlock, and my dad can't get free. All of the other cops are busy and no one notices that he's being choked out. His vision is going dim when someone finally sees and knocks the big guy out. In the end, the entire party was arrested, and my dad ended up with a few broken neck bones, a nice bruise and permanent damage to his neck muscles. Irony of it all is that it was the wrong house. Dispatch sent them to 123N, Maine instead of 123S, Maine. There just also happened to be a loud party going on at that house. Edit. Spelling. I had the cops called on me for a noise complaint because I was unloading my dishwasher. Also had them stop by for music I wasn't playing. Don't live below paranoid meth addicts, kids. Not a cop, but my dad called the security patrol at our apartment complex on the people above us for the pounding music at 10 PM at night. When security came by, who was a police officer who lived there and just getting off his shift, he heard the noise and was shocked. He said he'd take care of it. My dad goes to take a shower, and when he gets out, there's a few more cop cars. My dad sticks his head out and sees the cop and asked what happened. The cop knocked on the door and the resident opened the door, saw the officer and slammed the door on his hand. The resident got arrested and they moved out a few days later. Edit. I need to clarify something here. When the resident opened the door, he didn't say anything, nor wait for the cop to say anything. He slammed the door immediately shut, which is when the officer lifted his hand and put it on the frame. The officer was off duty, but he was in his uniform. Received a noise complaint at 2:30 AM. We went to make contact with the individual, and when we arrived, the house was shaking to music that was so loud, you couldn't understand the lyrics. We knocked repeatedly with no response. After shining our flashlights into the window, he sees our lights and walks past the front door into the garage. At this point, we are concerned for our safety because we have no idea why or what he went into the garage for. He opens the door slowly, steps into the doorway, revealing this 60-ish-year-old man in nothing but his tighty whities looking like Walter White. He begins to apologize and follows up with the Lady Gaga program is almost over anyways. Myself and the other officer can't control our laughter. We ask him to turn it down and leave in tears. My dad's buddy from either the academy or his partner from early days of patrol, while on patrol in 2000, got a call to a noise complaint by an old man. He went to the scene and the old man was sitting on the porch with a shotgun. He didn't wait for backup to come because welp, it was just a crotchety old man. No biggie. He got out of his patrol car and as he walked up toward the porch, the old man shot him in the face with the shotgun. He was probably in his 30s or early 40s at the most. His daughter is now in her 30s. Edit. Here's a link to his ODMP. JC Risley. Dad still has newspaper clipping of his obit. Guys from the sheriff's office who knew JC still talk about him and miss him often. Not a loud noise complaint, but a possible suicide attempt. There was reports of a girl out on a ledge in a high-rise building, so we go try to figure out which apartment it is. They let us in. It's a couple of girls and a guy. It turns out, no suicide attempt, just some dumbasses sitting on a really high ledge like it ain't no thing, smoking cigarettes. But as we were trying to figure out what was going on, we saw drug paraphernalia in plain view, which is probable cause enough to search. But just to be extra safe, we got permission from the girl whose apartment it was to search. We found a buttload of drugs and more paraphernalia, but also in plain view was a laptop open with a fake ID right there where you could see. Turns out the guy was on probation or parole for fraud and ID theft. The search also yielded a large plastic tub container of other people's identifying information. Became away toys. I called the police to make a noise complaint on the people above me. They partied all the time and it was annoying. Well, the police show up and I can hear them knocking upstairs. Boom boom boom. I look out my balcony window and I see legs dangling from above. Some guy jumps onto my balcony asking me to let him in. No. I called the police again and told them he was on my balcony. They knock on my door and I let them grab the guy. So freaky as a young woman alone in her apartment. Funny now though. Dude just wanted me to let him in so he could escape out the far exit. Animal control officer here. I handle noise complaints when they involve animals. So usually it's about excessive barking. But not this time. I received a noise complaint about someone's cats. So I called the RP, reporting party, to get more info. I assumed they were obnoxiously loud Siamese cats or something. But no. This guy was complaining that his neighbor's cats played too loud at night. What? I went out to the property to see what was up and it turns out these people don't even share a wall. It's neighboring mobile homes in a mobile home park. The RP was absolutely outraged because those damn cats keep him up all night when they bat their little toys with bells in them all over the place. He insisted I write their crazy cat lady owner a citation on the spot. Thankfully, I was able to use the municipal code to my advantage here and point out that before I could issue a citation I would need to receive a second complaint, in writing, from another neighbor who was also bothered by the noise. No surprise, he couldn't convince anyone else to complain, and the cat lady and her rambunctious kitties lived happily ever after, cause that crazy RP moved away a few months later. I left law enforcement after 2 years and changed careers. TL. Too depressing. This happened at the same department I worked at 6 years after I left. Barking dog complaint.